always send that over. I've got a microphone at shot here, so my normal podcasting routine. Is it on the left? I'm not hearing anything at the moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. We have a very special guest with us today, a man by the name of Mike Sr., who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. Mike is a highly experienced audio engineer with over 20 years in the industry. He's worked on a wide range of projects from major label pop records to independent film soundtracks and has developed a reputation for delivering high-quality results on time and on budget. His best-selling books, Recording Secrets for the Small Studio and Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio, provide a complete recording and mixing masterclass based around the techniques of hundreds of the world's most famous producers. Likewise, Mike is also one of the most prolific authors for Sound on Sound and is a respected educator in the field, and I personally am very excited to have him here on the show today so that he can share his wealth of knowledge and experience with the HSS crew. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was me for my intro, but let's give Mike the intro that is deserved. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mike Sr.
Yeah, well, that's a new one on me. That's the first time I've had that kind of a run-up.
We like to keep it cool around here.
A pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. There's so many questions that I have, but I think I'm just going to kind of go with the flow here. And first and foremost, thank you so much for all of the work that you've done in the audio community, helping to educate individuals, myself included. I have been a huge fan of the Sound on Sound podcast. I've been a huge fan of your personal publications. And so just right out of the gate, the first sort of question that comes to mind is, what inspired you to become an audio engineer, and how did you actually get started in the industry?
It's a bit of a, it's not maybe the normal kind of story you'd expect. I mean, the normal trajectory seems to be basically you were in a rock band and then you kind of were in a studio and then you became a T-boy and then became an engineer. But actually, I was a choir boy. I was like classically educated up to degree level, did a totally theoretical classical music degree. But while I was doing that, I began to get interested in music technology as a thing, just as a compositional tool. And then I thought, oh, this is actually quite fun. Began then during my holidays and my last couple of years at university, then going around trying to get work experience. Managed to get work experience in studios, managed to kind of parlay that eventually into a full-time job as an in-house engineer at a residential studio in Milton Keynes. And then from there, I then transitioned then to come back up to Cambridge and settled down with my wife my wife to be in Cambridge, and started working at Sound on Sound that's based in Cambridge there. And then ever since then, I mean, after a few years at Sound on Sound, I went freelance from there. And so I've been writing freelance for them, mixing and recording, and also ending up kind of expanding into training and doing videos and podcasts and writing books and stuff. It's the classic freelance existence of doing too many things at once.
Wow. That's quite a repertoire there, and what a way to come up. So and it does appear that I have frozen again, so I apologize, guys. I
have this. People often glaze when I'm going on about myself.
I am trying to get
I'm glad I have this effect on the technology too.
Mike, I'm trying to get your audio up a little bit over here on my end. Is there any way that you could possibly turn up just a bit?
Probably not easily.
Okay,
let me just. I might be able to do it in Zoom. Give me 2 ticks.
Okay.
I might be able to turn it up here. Let's see. Is that giving you a higher level?
Oh yeah, that's
getting me higher now.
There we go.
Brilliant. Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, excellent background, excellent way to come up in it, and like you said, it's definitely a lot different from some of the stories that I've heard of the people that I've interviewed on here. So that's kind of cool to get a different perspective. I would like for you then to sort of touch on, now that you've been involved in this now for a number of years, can you talk about maybe a particularly challenging project that you've worked on and how you overcame those obstacles that you had to navigate through?
Wow. God, it's like where to start really. The thing is that the thing I tend to specialize in is recording in non-standard situations, project studio situations, rather than in professional studios. So most of the sessions that I do have some like weird restriction or other that I have to deal with. I mean, just off the top of my head, I recorded a band. I mean, this is just before lockdown now, but I recorded a band where they had 4 lead vocalists who were singing at the same time, and they had a four-man band, and they wanted to track everyone together so that they could do well, we ended up doing 2 albums in 4 days. And so you immediately have to start thinking about okay, how am I actually going to get any control over that to be able to do any kind of decent mix out of it and keep some kind of separation, give me the opportunity maybe to like mix and match between different full band takes, maybe to get a different vocal phrase from another take or stuff like that. And yeah, so in all these situations, I find myself having to kind of try non-standard things. I mean, the second time I recorded this band, I actually built myself a kind of a cross-shaped baffle. If you look from above, it's like it's like an X, so that all of the singers could sing into the baffle. I had like plexiglass between them to get separation between them while they could all see each other and they could all sing together at the same time.
Wow.
And yeah, so those, and so many things about Project Studio recording are like just making it up on the spot and trying to do some non-standard thing. It's not like, you'd never have read that in a book anywhere.
No.
But then that's my life really. I end up doing lots of stuff like that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a moment of clarity with Mike Sr. So basically what Mike is saying is it's okay to experiment. It's okay to try new stuff out. If you think it's going to work, I mean, the worst that can happen is that you try something out and it falls flat on its face. And
yeah, I've done that one too. I've done that one too. But there's a
Guilty.
specific example I can think of. It's like, obviously, inevitably, a lot of the time, it doesn't help anyone to write about stuff that didn't work because they want to know what does work.
Right.
I mean, normally whenever I write about a recording session or write about a mixing session, I try to include some information about stuff I tried that didn't work. I say, well, I tried this and it was a bit rubbish and this is how I had to fix it afterwards or whatever it is. But I remember one thing I tried. I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I thought, okay, I know the idea of a reflection filter, but they're pretty expensive. Surely it's pretty much just like a curved baffle with a bit of foam on the inside. So I got a bucket and I cut it in half, took the bottom out of it, and put acoustic foam in the middle. And thought, okay, well, I'll try using this as a little baffle for my like snare mic to stop the hi-hat getting in.
Yeah.
And it sounded horrible. It was like, well, there's an afternoon I wasted chopping up a bucket and sticking acoustic foam in it. Just know that just sounds horrible. Because the sound kind of reflected, because it acted like an acoustic parabola, and then you got these horrible kind of resonance things going, oh, it was disgusting. It sounded horrible. So I thought, well, no, that's a rubbish idea. I'll throw that one away.
And it's funny that you say that because I've kind of had that same experience with those baffles that go behind microphones.
Yes.
Those shields that they sell. I got one in the mail. Someone had sent it to me for a review. Very awesome build quality. I thought, man, just by the looks of this thing, it's going to produce some awesome results. It's going to get me some great separation, especially here in a small home studio. I don't have to deal with reflections. I put the thing up and like 700 to 1K, there was this honkiness that just would not go away. And I was like, what is that? Where's that coming from? Because I know this singer. It was coming from that reflection filter.
Yeah.
I was like,
okay. Because
it
bounces back from the same distance all the way around the microphone. Yeah. In fact, I think a lot of the time when I see people using those reflection filter style things, they're using them for the wrong reason. There's absolutely no reason to use one of those things if you're in a home studio. partly because you're singing into a cardioid microphone and it's not sensitive from that direction anyway. So it does a perfectly good job of rejecting the room sound from behind the microphone. The problem is behind you.
Right.
So you do much better to hang like a big quilt or some packing blankets or something behind you and just sing into a mic ordinarily. And then you get none of the stupid resonance problems, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and you see people working in a completely untreated space with nothing behind them, and then a reflection filter around the bit of the mic that isn't picking up the room sound. So it's like, that makes no sense. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people using reflection filters kind of are missing the point, and you really don't need them for home studio vocal recording. The time when they can potentially be useful is when you're in an ensemble environment, or if you're using a microphone that isn't a cardioid, or you're using like a figure of eight, you know. So you don't want the sensitive bit of that picking up the room sound. And yeah, okay, then you put a reflection filter around it. But no one's ever recording vocals with figures of eight in a home studio. I mean, very few people use Omni enough in the home studio, but yeah. But in an ensemble environment, I've used them in ensembles, and they work okay. They make a difference. They cut a bit of the spill out, but it's still not a huge difference.
You've heard it here first, folks. Throw out the reflection filters.
I mean, literally, I've got one sitting on the shelf that I never use.
Exactly, and that's where I can actually look at mine right now, and it has literally set up there collecting dust now. Ever since I used it the first time, and I realized it just doesn't work.
I wonder whether we could come up with a different use for a reflection filter. I mean, it's a bit big to be a doorstop, but I wonder.
Right.
And it's quite. I mean, maybe if you could bend it a bit more, you could put it around your cup of coffee and it would keep it insulated. You keep your coffee warm for longer. And because obviously there's still an open bit, the handle would still have a place to go through.
You know, actually,
there you go.
The way that they close, they kind of look like a clam. Maybe you could like slip a bottle of wine down there and just...
Oh, yeah, it's a cooler. That's it. It's perfect. Get two of them and put your champagne bucket in the middle.
Right. Or if you're wanting to take that wine on a flight, you just clamp it around there and that's your flight case. And it won't...
That's true. It's true.
It's about all they're good for.
Heard it here first. I think you need to give yourself that sound effect now, the little tinkly one with the darkness sound does.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a moment of clarity with me.
You.
Wait a minute, that doesn't happen.
Just did. It's a first.
Right. There's a lot of firsts here. So another thing that I wanted to bring up is because you just mentioned something about the cardioid and the figure of eights, and you recently talked about omnidirectional polar patterns to take care of proximity effect. Can you talk a little bit more about like what would be a good mic choice for home studios based off of what you just kind of said, just sort of riff off of that? Because I get a lot of questions about obviously which is the best microphone to buy. And for me, that's kind of a redundant question. It's one of those where it's like, well, what's your space look like? What does your singer sound like? What does, there's so many different factors, but just sort of from your years of expertise, when would you like reach for an omnidirectional over a figure of eight over a cardioid?
I mean, the issue of figure of eight and omni is kind of a little bit the same one. Really, it's when would I not reach for a cardioid is pretty much the distinction. Right. And for the most part, I mean, omni mics just have so much benefit. I mean, if you're close miking things for a start, basically what a cardioid mic does is it spotlights a small area of whatever you're pointing the mic at. And the moment you use an omni, it just widens that area that it's picking up. Pick up more of the direct sound of the instrument. Another thing is that if you're recording acoustic guitar or something, the sound of the first reflections to the room is actually part of what makes an acoustic guitar sound like a natural acoustic guitar. So picking up some of that is not going to harm you at all. I mean, people are a bit concerned about, if you use omnis, you're going to pick up loads of room sound and stuff. But as you said, omnis do that spotlighting thing. Ooh, that's interesting. That's one moment. Don't know quite why my camera has just switched off.
There we go.
That's never happened before. There you go.
Another first.
So it is a first. Maybe you have that effect on my technology. Yeah. So I think people are worried about there being too much room ambience when you use an omni microphone, and because there's no proximity effect, and because it doesn't spotlight as much as a cardioid microphone does, you can just move it a bit closer, and then it's not really an issue. You only have to move it about like 30 or 40% closer before it's pretty much as roomy as a cardioid is. The low end of omnis is great. you know, any instrument that you want to catch the low end of, Omni's really, really good at that. And it does it in a really natural way that doesn't kind of change the phase relationship between the mid-range frequencies and the low end. Ensemble pickup, I prefer Omnis over pretty much anything. Certainly for anything like acoustic or classical, where I can use Omnis, I'll always use Omnis.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is another issue. If you're using it in an ensemble situation, people are worried about, oh, am I going to pick up loads of spill on an Omni? And well, yes, you will, but picking up a lot of spill isn't the problem. It's when that spill is coming from too far away and sounds like reverb that it's a problem. And it's when it sounds horrible, which it does coming into the side of a cardioid or back of a cardioid. I mean, one of the best engineers in the world, unfortunately, has just recently passed away, a guy called Al Schmidt, who's won more Best Engineering Grammys than anyone else. He records big band in a studio with his close mics on the saxes and the trombones and whatever else are Omnis. And you go, oh, well, shouldn't there be a spill problem? Because they're all sitting next to each other. He goes, well, yes, there is a spill problem, but the spill sounds good. So you need to get out of the habit of thinking of spill as being just reverb, rubbishy sounding reverb that you don't want. If you move to the idea of spill being multi-miking, think, you know, if you want to get a great electric guitar sound, you might put 2 or even 3 mics on it to get more of the tone of it. And it's the same when you set up an ensemble and set up those Omni mics. You're effectively, every instrument in the ensemble is being multi-mic'd by every mic that you've set up. And as long as those spill combinations sound, spill contributions sound natural, and as long as those mics aren't too far away from each other, you're just going to get something that sounds much better than any of those individual instruments would sound on their own otherwise.
Nice. I like the fact that you called it spill contribution. That's yet again, we might have more of these today than we ever have. Moment of clarity.
Oh, spill is your friend. I love spill. But then again, that's another reason why I like Omnis, because it makes spill so much easier to deal with in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it too, because like here recently, for instance, I had a singer-songwriter here in this room that I call a home studio, and I've always had a hard time getting a good acoustic guitar sound, which this was going to be mainly acoustically driven. So I thought, I'm going to pull out all the stops. I'm going to try some stuff I haven't tried before, which, by the way, if you guys haven't done, do. Every once in a while, just try something. But I actually put up a Warm Audio W87 in a figure of 8 with a Stephen Slate ML1 on top of that with the capsules lined up in cardioid fashion. And I got the best acoustic guitar sound I've ever got in this room. But yet again, I was picking up ambience. I was picking up spill. And I think that's where a lot of times I haven't done it because of that mindset of, oh no, I don't want that. And do you think that originated mainly because of like the digital world where we had everything sort of microscopic and we were wanting to like just completely isolate the snot out of everything so that we could?
A little bit. I mean, I think there's a danger when certainly when you're recording, that you fall foul of the kind of the illusion of control. You know, you're never really completely in control. You never can completely control, certainly not in a project studio. You're always just kind of trying to do the best you can with it. And in that kind of situation, you're thinking, well, what's the worst problem I have here? And how can I get as close to the actual sound I want in the end as possible? And a lot of the time you see people like close miking the hell out of something. And then you get to the mix and they go, well, why does this sound dead? And why do I need to add loads of reverb to it? It's because, well, you spent your recording session getting rid of all that stuff.
Right.
And the reverb that you're now adding is going to sound a lot less good than the room sound that was in the room. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you talked about using multi-pattern mics. This is another thing about figure of 8 and Omni patterns on multi-pattern mics, is that it's not just the polar pattern that changes. I had such a shock with it was a Rode mic I was using to record some guy's acoustic guitar in cardioid, and I put it up in cardioid. I thought, oh, that sounds horrible, and I switched it to Omni, and it wasn't just that it changed the polar pattern, it changed to being a really lovely sounding mic all of a sudden. The whole frequency response changes when you switch pattern as well. So a reason to switch to Omni isn't just because you're thinking about how directional it is or spill, all this kind of stuff. The sound of the Omni capsule may be a lot better than the cardioid as well.
That's a good way to look at it. Nice. So in that same sort of vein of thinking,
I mean,
then,
certainly with cheap mics as well. Certainly
Yeah.
with cheap mics, it's a lot easier to make a good sounding cheap Omni than it is to make a good sounding cheap cardioid.
Good point. Yeah, definitely. So that kind of dovetails into another question then that we just got in the chat, which was, what about mic emulators? What's your take on those?
This is a very thorny issue. When I think it was actually one of the first Slate system that came out,
Mm-hmm.
I joined a kind of a sound on sound panel where we met at a local studio. We put this thing through its paces next to a couple of the actual mics themselves that we got from one of the big rental companies. And we kind of disagreed. We had a free and frank exchange of views about this whole topic, even at the time between us. And the difficulty with me is what you say is the goal of those systems. The way it's doing what it's doing is it's effectively got some kind of an EQ and maybe even a phase response algorithm that translates what's coming from the microphone through that whatever response they're creating into the desired response. And the implicit assumptions that are involved in that process are at once what makes it successful and also what reveal its limitations. Let me explain now that I've said a whole bunch of just words, right? If all you're going to do is sing on axis to a large diaphragm condenser microphone, then, and you're going to eliminate the room sound, then that approach, there's not much wrong with it. A lot of what characterizes different microphones is their specific frequency response.
Right.
And they could probably soften some transients and whatever. There's stuff you can do with the algorithm like that to make that work. It's when you start thinking about the other stuff that you might consider with a microphone. Like, well, what happens if I move off axis a bit, or if I move a bit further away or a bit closer? The physical characteristics of a microphone are much less easy to model when the microphone doesn't know where you are.
Yeah.
It doesn't know how far away you are, or how close you are, or how the proximity effect varies with distance for that mic as opposed to the classic mic that it's trying to emulate or whatever. It also doesn't know things like where exactly what angle you are with the capsule, because of course the frequency response varies according to the angle you are at the capsule. If you start using it in any situation where it's not a point source it's picking up, then all of a sudden the stuff that's coming in at this angle rather than directly on axis, there's no way you can know what sound is coming in at this angle as opposed to what's coming in this angle. So it can't decide how the mic that is actually recording, the Slate mic, how differently that responds from the classic mic it's trying to emulate, because it doesn't know where that sound's coming from.
Right.
And the dirty secret about cheap, but cheaper large diaphragm condenser mics is that if you sing into them, they tend to sound okay. But the moment you start getting sound coming in from not the front of them or from the back of them, that's when they tend to sound horrid. That's where the really expensive mics really start to shine. And you only, I mean, I've got another example of this, but that's what you only really begin to notice when you start recording ensembles and putting them through their paces where you're recording bigger instruments, where more sound comes in off axis and all that kind of stuff. If you just stick a vocalist up in front, it's not the best test for the technology, because it's playing into its hands. It's doing what it wants you to think it can do. And it's wanting you to think, oh, because it can record direct vocals and sound like any microphone, well, it can do that with piano as well. And it can do that with acoustic guitar. And no, it can't. It can't do that in an ensemble environment. In fact, I've got a really good example that really strongly demonstrated this to me. I was doing some work with the AES student body, and doing some training work, and me and a guy called Hayden Bendel, who was chief engineer at Abbey Road for a long time and did like Kate Bush and some loads of stuff. We both went to do a recording session in a Russian university over in Moscow, where all the kind of Eastern European and Russian students met for a big student summit, and we did a recording session in their student room. And because of the AES connections, they'd managed to get an endorsement from Sennheiser, the local Sennheiser distributor, who also dealt with all the Neumann microphones. They all went through Sennheiser as well. So when we turned up, we were in this studio that was, I mean, really the studio was not a great studio. It looked very much kind of sellotaped together. It was, it looked like a bedroom. It looked like a band rehearsal room. It was really quite low tech. They had a band in there. They were all set up. They had the instruments, and in the middle of the floor, there were about at least 50 grand's worth of box fresh Neumann and Sennheiser mics, top of the range stuff. They even had their new digital large diaphragm. It was just incredible. All the very best mics that money can buy, new. So it was like, okay, let's have TLM 103s on each of the toms. It's like this insane. I mean, it's the kind of microphone stuff that I never normally use, because I'm normally using all the budget stuff that I'm always writing about. And so I know what it's like to be in that environment and to record a band like that, which I've done many times, with ordinary Project Studio gear. And so I was thinking, this is going to be a proper job of work, but they'll learn a lot from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hayden Bendel is used to working with these microphones the whole time. And so he goes, okay, yeah, I think I know what we should do here. We'll put this on this and this. And so we literally eyeballed all the microphones, just put them up by eye. I went into the other room to have a listen to how they sounded. And I was thinking, well, yeah, this is always the start of my recording session. So I would expect for each one of those microphones then that I would fade them up and go, oh, that sounds a bit dodgy, and then move it a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
At least 80% of the microphones I'd move, swap out, change, because you've got to work hard with Project Studio microphones. And we went in, we turned up the first microphone and was like, well, that sounds okay. Next microphone sounds pretty good too. All the way through, I think we maybe moved one microphone.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I knew this was the case, but I hadn't realized quite how powerful this effect is. If you're using really good microphones, the difference of the off-axis sound is enormous. And it just makes life too easy. And in fact, in recent years, I was thinking to myself, I do a lot of recording. It'd be nice to have a few really nice mics that I can put up to get a really nice sound and not have to work too hard. And I thought, well, actually, if I do that, if I'm in a situation where I want to show people how to record and how to get good results in a Project Studio, I'm not going to have anything to tell them. I can just, so all you can say is, okay, go out and spend $4,000 on a microphone.
Right.
That'll solve your problems. It's like, how useful is that? Not useful at all. So I've actually consciously made a decision for all the kind of tutorial work in particular that I do, but in general for my recording stuff and training stuff, not to use expensive microphones, because you don't have to work nearly as hard with them. You actually have to put your work in a Project Studio to get a good result in a way you don't have to with the expensive ones.
Right.
So this is a long anecdote for the reason why I don't think the Slate microphone is worth the money unless all you are going to do with it is record a dry vocal. And then there is an argument that having the ability to flip a switch and go through lots of different sounds has a benefit, because the big difficulty with choosing microphones for vocals is that you can never really predict which microphone is going to work.
Right.
Everything is different, and it's useful to have some selection of microphones to be able to get a different sound that suits that particular person. And so in that case, yeah, that's a benefit I could see over buying 4 budget microphones. You can have one slightly more expensive one with this modeling thing and switch tonal flavors. But actually, does that make it good value for money for most people in Project Studios? I wouldn't recommend it myself, but there will be someone who says, well, no, actually, I run a voiceover studio and I have 50 different vocalists coming in here every year.
Right.
It's actually gonna make a difference, going to be useful for me. In most other situations, I go, well, actually, I'd rather have 2 or 3 cheaper large diaphragm mics so that I can, or one multi-pattern microphone, because that for Project Studio, general purpose use, is going to be a lot more useful.
That's a really good point. And what you
I think I've over-answered that question.
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. Actually, what you've done is I'm kind of cringing inside right now, because I actually own the Slate mic and I haven't done a review on it yet because of this very reason. I haven't felt like I've got enough information to really, because I've literally had a guitar and a singer in front of it tops.
Yeah.
But I've not tried to really run it through its paces enough to say, okay, here's my full-blown review on this microphone. With that being said, now that you're bringing up what you're bringing up, because I have seen that personally myself with the warm audio microphone, which is the most expensive microphone that I own, I noticed this immediately. Like you said, I thought I was hearing stuff, but when I got off axis, it's almost like I didn't move at all. It just got a little bit more muffly.
Yeah.
Whereas with like maybe the Rode NT1A that I have, when you move off axis a little bit,
Oh, yeah.
it's like, ooh, what just happened? So it's
Yeah.
almost, I kind of hate to say this, but I mean, we're an honest podcast here. I mean, I feel like from everything that you've just said that you could viably say that these companies are actually preying on home studio owners because they're not going to know what you know. They're not going to ever walk into a room and have
Yes.
16 TLMs and Neumann microphones laying on
Yep.
the floor to know that.
Yes, and I think it's fair to say, I mean, obviously, any company that sells a product has to convince you that you have a problem that they have the solution for.
Right.
And it's the same, yeah. I mean, but and so I don't know whether I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that this is a product that does have a potential use, but I think it's important as a consumer and as someone who is commenting on it to be clear about what its limitations and restrictions are. And I think there is, and therefore how widely to recommend it. I mean, I had the same problem actually, or the same issue with things like SonarWorks reference. I mean, they make a lot of bold claims for something that has a very, very narrow usage band. And I've never been able to justify recommending it as a result. Just because, yeah, it doesn't solve enough problems to be worth the money.
Right.
Yeah. So, and it's, yeah, but there are lots of companies like that. They try and tell you, oh, you know, this new plugin is the thing that's going to give you the analog warmth you're looking for. This is going to give you the sparkle to your mix or whatever it is. And yeah, to a degree, it does certain things well, and you've got to learn what those are, what it can and can't do.
I think sort of the overbearing arch of some of the more expensive plugins or emulations or hardware units, at least for me, what I've seen is you're basically paying more to get the results that you're looking for faster. Whereas you could use, 15 plugins to do what this one plugin that's $300 would do. It'll just take you longer to get to that point. But, and essentially it's the same way I feel like with microphones as well.
Oh yeah, I was literally just about to say that. You're absolutely right. What you're paying for is you're paying for the speed at which you can get results.
Right.
Absolutely, yeah. And certainly that's the way with microphones. And also, to be honest, it's the same on the other side of the system. It's the speed with which you can get results if you have decent speakers and if you have decent acoustic treatment. It's exactly the same thing.
Very, very good point. Very good point.
And actually, you've got a bunch of guitars on the wall behind you. Is it easier to get a good result with a good guitar? Yes, much quicker.
Right. And I have to admit too that most of these are budget guitars. So yet again, it's like, to me as a guitarist, it's how's the guitar set up? Because you can take a budget guitar and you can set it up to where it plays like a $3,000 Fender,
Right.
And then it all comes down to, obviously, have you practiced? And I'm not even going to go there. We're not even going to talk about that stuff.
It's all in your fingers, yeah.
Midnight Blue Movies has a question. He says, I do very little live recording, just the electric guitar. He says, I use an SM58, which is industry standard. They're awesome. As that's the mic that I have. I point it right next to the speaker and then press record. Should I do anything else? I'll give you my 2 cents and then I'll kind of let Mike take over. But personally for me, pointed at the speaker, press record, that's pretty much it. But I would actually take a little bit of time to move it around, especially based on the mix that you're working with, because where you place it on the cone or on the edge of the cone is going to provide different results. So Mike, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly reiterate that. I mean, the 58 is pretty much the same design as I understand it as the 57, but without the ball screen that's on it. That just changes the response of it a little bit. So the 57 is the classic electric guitar close mic. So yeah, you won't go wrong with the 58. In fact, if you want, and I certainly used to see this in studios, if you want, you can actually unscrew the little ball from the top of it, as long as you don't shower it in dust and stuff, and it'll be fine. I mean, dynamic mics are tremendously robust, and 58s in particular. I mean, you must have seen those videos of people like driving trucks over them and stuff.
Right.
There was one where some guy buried it in the garden for a year, and they got it up and washed it under the tap, and it still passed signal. It was great.
Oh my goodness.
But a few other things I would suggest. There are a few things I'd suggest. One of them is perhaps to consider where it is in relation to the floor and the walls of the room. I mean,
Mm.
on the audio examples that go with my recording secrets book on my site, I've got quite a few examples that show you actually that the sound of the same mic in the front of the same guitar cab in different areas in the room in different rooms does actually sound different. Even if you haven't moved the microphone. So that's definitely something to look into. I usually, when I record electric guitars, have the amp on a little stand that lifts it maybe, I don't know, 6 inches off the ground and angles it slightly upwards. And it serves two purposes. Firstly, it makes the bounce off the floor that creates some kind of comb filtering, makes the sound bounce less off the floor. But secondly, what it does is it directs the amp up towards you as the player. And so you're less likely to overdrive and overdrive, over crunch and over brighten your guitar tone when you're recording it. You'll hear more like what the microphone's hearing. And so it'll be easier to judge, what kind of sound you should be looking for, because you'll get closer to that sound actually out of the amp because you're firing it directly at yourself rather than at your knees.
Wow. That's okay. I'm on Amazon right now ordering amp stands right now. So,
and I mean, and actually that's also a big deal for recording bands. The number of times, you get people who rehearse in the rehearsal rooms and they dial up their sounds when their amp's pointing the other way or behind a sofa or something. And even in the studio, they'll be stood around and all their amps will be on the floor pointing at their legs. You suddenly put it on a stand and point it a bit up and they go, oh, blimey, that's a bit fierce. And they turn it down and they make it slightly less fuzzed. And that makes recording a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because people usually tend to over push their guitar drive in Project Studio recordings.
Yeah, we've used it in worship settings a lot of times too. Especially in cathedrals or, some sort of a worship auditorium, the guitar and the bass is just like blasting and reverberating all over the place. And the second you put it on a stand, the low end sort of disappears, like you were talking about, like the comb filtering, the buildup, the low end sort of disappears. And then you get individuals, instead of the bassist and the guitarist cranking it up and then the next guy cranking it up, trying to, I'm louder than you now, I'm louder than you. It turned into like, okay, we sound good together. It was like, all we needed was stands? Wait a minute.
Yeah. I mean, it's also worth bearing in mind that boundary effect makes a difference too. If you stick your amp next to a solid wall, you're going to get a tip up in the low end response. And if your guitars are sounding muddy, one of the reasons might be that you've stuck your amp in the corner of the room. I mean, if you're in a small room, often you stick your amp out of the way so you're not tripping over it. But for recording purposes, it would make sense to bring it out of the corner so you're not getting this like double or triple boundary effect thing coming from the floor and both of the sidewalls, because that just makes it sound muddy. It'll sound clearer if you get it out.
Good points, guys. Listen, these have all been moments of, actually this whole podcast has been a moment of clarity. For crying out loud, this guy's a wealth of knowledge. Okay, so let's move away from microphones because we could talk about that all day long. That's probably one of my favorite things to collect, even if I never use it.
Well, you're onto something. I mean, again, one of my top tips about spending money in Project Studios is if you're going to spend money to get good results, spend it on the things that touch the air. So spend it on the microphones, spend it on your speakers and your monitoring stuff, and spend it on your acoustic treatment. And of course, spend it on your instruments as well. Everything in between those bits, everything between it hits the microphone and gets changed into an electrical signal. If all the other stuff is great stuff, I'll make a great record for you on a phone. None of the rest of it matters. I've done plenty of mixes using just freeware. It doesn't matter if you can hear what you're doing, and your microphones are any good, and the stuff that's actually touching the air is any good. You can make a professional record.
And that brings up a good point, because I know we're trying to get off this subject, but I love microphones. So
I dragged you back.
And I am frozen again. Okay, hold on a second here. The point that it brings up, though, is like, even right now with the microphones that I own, okay, the two most expensive mics is a Slate ML1 or VMS, whatever it's called, VMS, and then the Warm Audio W87. Those are two of the most expensive mics I own and probably ever will own, to be honest, because I really want an Earthworks SR25, but that's still out of my price range for now. But with that being said, one of my favorite microphones in my home studio, believe it or not, is an MXL V67G. Love that microphone.
That's interesting because for a long time, I recorded my vocals on a MXL V77. Yeah, nice. I just liked it more than the other ones. I still have it tucked away somewhere. But yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and there are loads of really good microphones that are super cheap. Really are. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to try to get out of the weeds here because we know it's going.
Yeah,
we're digging out. Okay, so let's go into mixing and mastering. So, how do you approach mixing and mastering a project, and what are some of your sort of go-to techniques for any given project? I know that's kind of a broad spectrum, but kind of
it's a pretty big question.
let's narrow it down.
Twist knobs till it sounds good. It's kind of a general, just to give an overview there.
That's awesome.
The mastering side of things, I'm not really a mastering engineer. Occasionally, if I mean, certainly the thing I've learned to do because it's useful and pertinent to my job as a mix engineer is that I can make things loud. And I've done a little bit of research into just making sure that I can make things loud if I need to. And for anything that isn't pulling multiple things onto a single album, because whenever I mix stuff, I compare it to commercial releases and I reference it extensively against my own reference collection, everything like that. I don't feel that it needs to sound different to try and fit with the market. It should sound the way it should sound. And so for just doing singles or doing individual songs, all I ever need to do is make it loud to do mastering, so to speak. So as far as I do that, yes, I master stuff, but the actual stuff that mastering engineers do in terms of dealing with like weird multimedia formats and also just fitting a bunch of things onto an album so they sound good together. I mean, that's rocket science that you need 10 years experience of, and that's just not my field. So the mastering side of things I don't really do, but I do the bit of making it loud for people if I'm just doing individual tracks for them, and that's fine.
Awesome.
So basically all my mastering work is mixing. I don't have a separate mastering stage other than deciding how loud it's going to go. And if it's going to have to go really loud because they want it to go really loud for whatever reason, then I might need to tweak the mix in response to the side effects of the loudness processing. But that's getting less and less these days as people are needing to push things loud less.
Yes. Thank you, Bob Katz and the Loudness Wars, and helping to spearhead that. Man, he's been phenomenal in trying to, and here lately, Bob Clearmountain been really good on that as well, in informing people, yourself, many individuals in the industry, but especially Bob Katz comes to mind because he was sort of the one that just like took the flag and ran to the top of the hill.
Yeah. I have quite a lot to do with Ian Shepherd as well, and he's really big on it as well with his perception meter and all this kind of stuff. Yeah,
Ian's a great guy.
Really
actually,
kind of
I need to have him on here now that you say that.
Oh yeah,
mental note.
Yeah.
Can you discuss any recent trends or advancements in audio engineering and how you feel like they're impacting the industry?
I think there are lots of things that have changed in the last 5 years or so. I mean, obviously the uptake of streaming as a thing, and the fact that the loudness model has changed the way records are now sounding and the way mixes are being made. And I've been noticing this for a while, and it's actually changing the way I mix as well, and the way I reference things. You know, if you go back 10 years, your primary concern was to make sure that your mix still survived at whatever loudness setting, you know, was appropriate for that segment of the market. And that was your only real consideration, you know. So you could push your stuff louder as long as it still didn't sound bad, you know. So you could fight in loudness wars terms if you wanted to. Now, because basically all the main streaming services now are loudness normalized, you're getting a slightly different loudness war. There is a new one going on, and it is with people trying to get the best out of the loudness normalization routines that are not that sophisticated. The actual technology that's going on under the hood of, for example, the RS-128 or whatever it's called, loudness format that, you know, like the LUFS standard and all this kind of stuff, is not that sophisticated. And I've seen from doing like my mix review blog and analyzing commercial releases and just charting the way tracks are changing, that you're getting, for example, a lot more like sub 80 hertz information. And it's because the loudness normalization routine is high pass filtered at 80 hertz. So if you put loads of 40 hertz on your record, it's going to have a lot less loudness cost than if you put 100 hertz on your record. So you'll see like frequency responses of mixes now tend to have be a bit scooped at 150 hertz and then have quite a lot of 50 hertz. So suddenly we're getting records that have a lot of like sub 40 hertz stuff that you would never have done 5 years ago, because if you had, you wouldn't have been able to push it loud in the traditional method, because it would have just clipped to hell, and that would have been the end of it. You lost all your mix headroom. But you can do that now under the loudness normalizing scheme. Similarly, the top end of the loudness algorithm or loudness detection algorithm is pre-emphasized. They boost, and I think it's about, from memory, I think it might be about 4 or 5K, something like that, which means that, no, I think it's about 3 or 4K. And so it means if you put a lot of energy in at 3 or 4K, that's going to be quite expensive in terms of loudness, and more expensive than the extreme high frequencies. And so you see people like pulling out that frequency and then boosting the high frequencies, then pushing a bit more of the kind of upper mid-range that's not as expensive. So I see this stuff going on. Also things like, kick drums that are long and resonant and rolling incur a much bigger loudness penalty in the loudness normalization routines than short, tight kick drums. And except below 40 hertz. So you see a lot of kick drums now that are very short and tight, except below 50 hertz, where they go along up and they have some big kind of tail going on.
Interesting.
You see these things happening. I mean, it was ever thus. Each new format has encouraged certain ways of producing music to try and make the biggest impact through that format. But that's one thing I've seen.
So would you say then that?
Sorry, go on.
Would you say then that the sort of smiley face curve thing has gone away, or is it just sort of shifted down a bit?
It's changed. It's become a slightly more sophisticated smiley face, if you like.
Okay.
You can't afford to boost too much, like 120 hertz. That's really expensive in loudness terms. But basically all it means now is that you need to bear this in mind. And when you're referencing your mix now, I mean, 5 years ago, I did not routinely reference my mix through a loudness normalizing routine rather. Whereas now I always do. So I'll do my usual, like checking it at the same kind of loudness level, but doing it with loudness processing. For those, there are still those people who download files and stuff. There's still some market for that. So I need to check it works like that. But also I need to check that when I loudness normalize, it sounds as powerful as another mix on as the other commercial mixes. So it's just an extra stage you need to bear in mind now that you didn't have to before. And it changes your mix decisions.
Awesome, man. Well, you know it's coming. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another moment of clarity with Mike Sr. Wow.
I'm noticing it also in song structures too. I mean, a lot of people have been noticing this now, that songs are getting shorter.
Yeah. Attention spans are getting shorter.
There's a really good example recently. I was just doing a mix review critique on my mix review blog about the latest, what's her name, Meghan Trainor song. I think it's called Made You Look. And it's got a lot of similarities with her first hit, All About That Bass. But if you compare the two alongside, I mean, All About That Bass is almost a minute longer. And you can see how they've pretty much crammed exactly the same structure into a minute less by, slightly speeding it up, by not having a double pre-chorus, by taking the instrumental outro off the end. They've moved the later choruses back after the second verse. They've done stuff to concertina it to fit into this 2 minutes 30 time length. And there are, it used to be, Blur's Song 2 used to be a classic example during, that was late 90s, early 2000s, something like that. That used to be the song that the DJs, they'd look at the clock and go, oh, crumbs, we've only got two and a half minutes left before the turn of the hour, before the weather comes on or whatever. And so they put on Blur's Song 2 because it was one of the only hit records that was that short. Whereas now there are loads and loads of songs that are huge hits that are sub 2.5 minutes. I mean, I was thinking like just Old Town Road was really short, wasn't it? And that Meghan Trainor thing. But I'm just trying, off the top of my head, I can't think of them because my head's awash with different tracks. But yeah, I just see it in the project that use to do my mixed review critiques. I can just see that all these things are kind of getting shorter now, or getting more shorter audio regions. But yeah, that's been a big difference, and that's the effect of TikTok, and that's the effect of streaming.
Yeah.
I mean, the effect of TikTok as well is that there are plenty of artists who now don't bother to create any kind of to spend time doing any kind of arrangement development. And I think it was a Doja Cat song that I heard, where basically it had 6 choruses, all of which were absolutely identical, which in a general kind of pop production and arrangement terms would be considered a real no-no, because it's like, that means you give it all at the beginning and there's nothing to keep people engaged for subsequent choruses. You know,
right.
the classic record production idea is that you add something, you keep adding something and keep building through that track. And it basically reveals that the producers don't care whether you listen to the rest of it.
Right.
All they care is that there's that 15-second section that you can use for your TikTok dance video or whatever it is. You know, they don't care about you listening to the whole thing. All they need is for you to listen to it on TikTok or listen to 30 seconds of it, and it will count as a play on Spotify, you know?
You know, and that's, it's kind of sad, but at the same time, I don't know, like I had an epiphany maybe about a month ago. I was on this big kick of, not publicly, but sort of on, as I was at work listening to the radio, stuff like that. I was like, man, all of the music sounded the same. There's no live bands anymore. They're all just using sequencers and samplers. And while there is like some kickback from guys like me that's sitting on my lawn going, get off my lawn, kids. There's also, there is an art form still to it though. You can't just pick up a laptop, get a load of samples and make a song with it. Like you have to know at least a little bit about what sounds good together. So as much as I would like to be like, yeah, you know, that overbearing 6 choruses thing is just way too much. It's kind of like artists nowadays have had to sort of like think outside the box and do things they normally wouldn't have done just to get heard or noticed. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing anymore. Now I'm just kind of like indifferent.
Well, I mean, I've never subscribed to this whole, it were better in my day kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think this might be partly an insight I get from having been classically trained. Like when I was at college, I kind of helped pay for college by busking with I'm a violinist and violist. And so I'd put together string groups and we'd go out busking on the street to earn money during holidays. And one of the groups that I had was just 2 violins. And there isn't very much music for 2 violins. There really isn't. And that no one, I mean, there's only there's a Bach and there's a Mozart, pretty much. There's a Bach double violin concerto. There's a couple of Vivaldi things. But, you know, you need a good 3 hours of music if you're going to play a 7-hour day, right?
Right. Otherwise,
you just bore everyone and they don't want you back. And, you know, you're trying to earn some money. It's a commercial thing. So it's like, where do I get 3 hours of material that sounds a bit like Mozart or Bach or Beethoven or whatever else? And so I went delving into the archives in the music library to see if I could find anything. And I found a bunch of these things from a guy called Ignaz Pleyel, another guy called Matsas. And these sounded a bit like Mozart, but not quite as good. And
okay.
You didn't really notice it. Loads of people came up and said, oh, is that Mozart? And you'd go, well, it's a bit like Mozart. It's a contemporary. But they were clearly second-rate Mozart people at the time. And the thing is, no one knows about them. And yet they did reams and reams and reams of stuff. And there were loads of people at that time doing reams of stuff. But there's a reason why we only remember Mozart. Because they weren't as good. And people just forgot about them and they remembered Mozart. And so it's easy, you could look back and say, oh, I wish we lived in the era of classical music because, it was all so good. And no, it wasn't. It's just that the only thing that survived to us is the good stuff. And you'll see the same thing if I've seen this doing classic mixes. I go back and I'm looking at something, I don't know, some like the House of the Rising Sun, for example. If you go back almost any year in the 60s where people go, yeah, it was the pinnacle of music, you'll find something like Val Dunican singing My Grandma Was Santa's Helper or something, It's like, there'll be some hideous thing that was like 3 weeks at #1 that no one remembers now. And, you just time filters that stuff out. And I still think there's incredible music being done now. I mean, it was really brought home to me with Billie Eilish.
Hmm.
You know, I'd begun to feel a bit jaded a few years back and thought, maybe I'll never feel again that kind of amazement of discovering a new bit of music and thinking, wow, I don't know who that is. You know, what it used to be, remember record shops? I remember walking into a record shop and hearing the first single off Fiona Apple's first album.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
literally, I walked in, and before I got anywhere near the records, I just walked straight up to the till and said, "Yeah, I've got to have that record, please. I don't know what it is, but can I have it, please?" And I thought that maybe that had disappeared, but exactly the same thing happened to me with Billie Eilish. I heard the first record off that. I mean, it was what do you want from me? What's the Bury a Friend? The song "Bury a Friend." I thought this is the future of music. I thought this is brilliant, and I just don't think. And occasionally, you bump into something like this, and you go, "That's just brilliant." And there is still such good music going on the whole time.
I think that
for another of my podcasts, I was doing like a rundown of the Grammy Awards nominations, and going down through the Grammy Award nominations as well. There's so much stuff that we are all in our own bubbles, and you don't hear maybe the latest bluegrass records or the latest like roots gospel records or whatever it is. And you go and listen to something and you find, wow, that's incredible that I didn't even realize existed. And yeah, there's so much incredible music going on, especially with the Project Studio kind of revolution now in full swing.
oh yeah. Yeah, I think it was
I'm just so optimistic in that respect.
it was about 2 years ago myself. I was I forget how I even yeah, now I remember. Okay, I was actually researching guitar and guitar players. Imagine that. And I stumbled across a video that was like the 50th birthday of BB King. And he had this guitarist on there named Derek Trucks. And I was like, who is that? Like, how is he on stage? Never heard of this guy. I don't know how, because I loved that era of music. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and the Allman Brothers and all that was like, I grew up on that, cut my teeth on that. And, you know, so immediately I left from the video because he played some pretty soulful licks on there. And I thought, well, he's only using a slide, much like the Allman Brothers did. Yeah. I was like, that's pretty cool. Well, then I stumbled across a song called Midnight in Harlem by Derek Trucks and the Tedeschi Band. If you guys have a chance to check it out, you owe it to yourself to check this out. It was the first time in probably 15 years plus maybe that I actually cried during a guitar solo. That guitar solo literally brought me to tears. And I was like, wow, there's still hope for finding this kind of good music. And the intro on that song was probably as long as the Doja Cat song in full.
Right. Yeah.
It was.
I had a similar experience actually with I can't remember the name of the artist now, but she was up for Best New Artist a while back. And I can't even remember the name of the song. My musical memory and my memory for names is dreadful. But it was in the Grammy a while back. It was a country artist, and I was wanting to listen through to all these Grammy nominations so that I could have an opinion on them and we could decide who we thought should win, all this kind of stuff. My podcast co-host, and I was just doing the hoovering while I was doing it, and this song brought tears to my eyes while I was doing the hoovering. I thought, what a song is that? Right. I mean, that is songwriting power. Brilliant.
So I got a couple of questions here that popped up in the Q&A, which, by the way, if you guys want to ask questions, I actually will be able to see them a lot easier if you use the Q&A that I've started here at the beginning of this.
I remember the name. It's Ingrid Andress, and it's Breaking More Hearts Than Mine. I think that's it.
Nice. I've not heard of that. Now you're going to make me go listen to it. Thank you.
Oh, it's such a good song. It's so clever as well. Really good.
Brian Faust is asking, is that your real last name, Brian? Or have you made a pact with the devil? Brian Faust is asking, if you've not heard of the Faustian pact, I'm sorry. You have to go
absolutely.
research that.
Yeah.
What audio software is your favorite?
It's a pretty wide field. I mean, I do all my mixing work and have for a long time in production work in Reaper, Cocos Reaper.
Awesome.
I'm a massive fan of it, and I don't really want to use any other system now. I'm so used to it, and it's all set up. It's heavily customizable. I have it set up exactly how I want to see it and use it, and yeah, Swear by it. It's brilliant, and it just
Awesome.
it does everything that I wanted to do.
Same reason why I still use Cakewalk. I mean, there's 100 DAWs out there, but once you customize it to where whenever I fire it up, it's going to work. For one, sorry, Pro Tools users, and for two, it's going to be completely customizable. I'm like, why would I switch? But as I always say here on the podcast or on the live shows that we have, whatever DAW that you're using, as long as you're making music with it, as long as you're staying creative, that's what matters most. At the end of the day, they're still just a tool. It just depends on what kind of hammer or screwdriver that you're using for,
and the thing is that the DAW, your choice of DAW is not the reason you're not making a good sounding record. It's just not the deal breaker. I mean, if you've seen any of my Mix Rescue remixes, I've done those in Logic, in Pro Tools, in Cubase, in Reaper. I've done it on a hardware system. It makes no difference at all. In fact, my whole studio used to be a hardware studio like 15 years ago. And it's only in the last 5 years or so that I've moved away from a hardware recorder for live tracking too. And it's just, those bits aren't the important bits. It's your mics and your monitors and your ears and your techniques.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the 353rd moment of clarity. Awesome.
Oh, I mean, but to be fair, I think a lot of people are now aware of that. And a lot of engineers, high-profile engineers, say that too. I mean, it's the easiest quote in the world to find from any engineer. It's not the gear that matters, pretty much.
Right. So Alexei Solovov Music asks, what kind of acoustic treatment should you have in your home studio? I'm just trying to think how to structure this in my head. Okay.
There are a few different things that you have to contend with. Broadly speaking, you've got two main issues, I suppose. You've got reflections and you've got resonances. Reflections are usually the easiest bit to deal with. You basically think, okay, well, if I had someone carrying a mirror around and I'm sitting in my sweet spot and in the mirror I can see my speakers, that's an acoustic reflection point. Sound will bounce off that and bounce over to you. And if it does that, it'll add an extra sense of reverb. It might even, if the boundary is quite close, it might even create comb filtering between the direct and reflected sounds from your speakers. It'll mess with your stereo imaging, your ability to judge like reverbs and effects and stuff and details, because they'll be covered over by these reflections. Obviously, you don't want a huge amount of reverb in your mixing room for the similar reasons. It just prevents you hearing stuff. So, and you can deal with those reflections very easily. Because usually, if it's as if I'm looking into my DAW screen here, and you're my DAW. If I'm looking there and my speakers are kind of either side there, then sound's going to be coming directly to me from my speakers. It's also going to bounce off the side walls. So about like a square meter of acoustic foam on either of those walls to catch that reflection, and probably up above me on the ceiling is another close surface, so another meter square up there. And maybe if the rear wall is very close to me, I might put another meter square behind there. Certainly don't cover any more of the space with acoustic foam than that, because otherwise you'll just suck all the high end out of your room. I mean, acoustic foam is not very good at absorbing stuff, even quite thick stuff. You'll get to about 200 hertz and it'll not be working very much anymore. Further down the spectrum.
Yeah, I made that
mistake. And the other bit,
I made that mistake when I first got into recording in my home studio at the other house. And it covered the entire walls. I bought this foam off of Foam by Mail, and it came in like a box like this big. And I was like, I paid $80 for that, and then I cut and it just like poof went everywhere. It was awesome. I gotta order it again just for that. But yeah, I covered the entire room, and the first strum of my acoustic guitar, I was like, oh my, what have I done? It's dead in here.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly that problem that you get along with a whole bunch of other ones from homemade vocal booths. Never build a homemade vocal booth. That's number one thing. No, don't do it. It always sounds worse in the vocal booth than it does out in the room with a duvet behind you. Never ever works. Even in big studios, there are some rubbishy sounding vocal booths, and trying to do it on a budget is doomed to failure. But that's just one of my little hobby horses. I'll breathe into the bag and get my blood pressure down again. But the second thing is resonances, of course, and there are a couple of different manifestations of that. One is flutter echo. That's that kind of, I mean, you hear it if you click your fingers in your room and you get this kind of zung kind of noise. That's flutter echo, and that's high frequency resonance. That usually, if you've put up your acoustic foam for getting rid of early reflections, if the ones on the side, you just extend slightly backwards, they'll also catch a potential crossways room resonance that would have created that pinging noise, that what we call a flutter echo. And the one that is behind your speakers, that is, or sorry, the one that is on the ceiling will stop the floor ceiling one. And if you have one behind you, in fact, I forgot to mention the one behind your speakers, you should have a patch of foam behind your speakers too, because of course the sound will go from your speakers to the back wall and come back to you. So you're just trying to catch all the reflection points. If you catch the reflection points, that will usually just, as a bonus extra, get rid of flutter echo, because you won't get high frequency resonances in those dimensions either.
Awesome.
It's the low frequency resonance then the problem, and that's where usually you then have to start spending money, because the reflections are dead easy. The early reflections are dead easy to take the edge off and stop causing problems with a bit of foam, and that's quite cheap. The low frequencies are difficult to deal with. I mean, the panels you see behind me are probably the cheapest solution to it. Just bits of high density rock wool, about 5 or 10 kilos per cubic meter. You get those in those kind of 2x4 blocks, and cover them in acoustic fabric. And yeah, you're just trying to use those. You've got to experiment a bit with it, but it's often you can do it across room corners, or you want to leave a little bit of space behind them. They're a bit more efficient if you do that, half a foot or so. And that is just to try and damp down the bass resonances. You'll never do it. I mean, I have about 20 panels in this room, and I still got bass resonance issues.
Right.
The thing you're trying to do is just trying to make it a workable room. You can never fix it. Not in any domestic or project studio room. You'll never fix the low end resonance issues. The main thing is just to make it manageable enough that you can do some useful work in it.
Great points, man. Great points. That brings me then to the next. First off, before I even get into the next question, we've went now about an hour and 14 minutes. How much time did you set aside for this? Because I don't want to.
I'm around how long you like. I mean, I set at least a couple of hours aside. So
okay, sweet. Okay, I didn't want to cut into any time. So then my next question for you then was, because this is kind of a dodgy, as you put it, area as well, but how do you balance the creative and technical aspects of your work as an audio engineer? Because I know sometimes it's hard to disconnect the two of them. How do you navigate that?
Actually, by doing exactly what you're talking about. If you, I mean, a classic example is Mix Rescue is a really good example here, because you'll often get a project in for something like Mix Rescue where there's a day and a half's worth of just editing and comping and tuning and fixing work that needs to be done. And I always try and front load that stuff. So I'll always try and get rid of all of that technical stuff at the outset, if I can, in order that then when I can take a break then and go, I could just then switch that technical bit of my brain off.
Right.
Then I can come back to it and approach it just from the perspective of, okay, what is this as a piece of music? Rather than thinking, oh, this is out of time, or this is out of tune, or there's noise on this that I don't want. So I think it's a discipline thing of just being conscious about it. I think if you're conscious about it, it usually sorts itself out. The danger is if you mix up the technical things with the creative things, you tend not to get very far in either space. The technical things prevent you getting into a kind of a flow and into the feeling of the track, and the creative things stop you being methodical and actually making sure you're fixing and tuning and doing whatever else that you need to do. So I literally just compartmentalize it. And typically for mixed projects, I try and do as much of that grunt work at the outset, much as, in fact, higher profile mix engineers would basically get their assistants to do. I mean, they often talk about it in passing in interviews that, oh yeah, I spend a day or a day and a half on a mix. And yeah, that's what you would spend on a properly prepared mix. The same for me. But oftentimes project studio mixes take me like 2.5 or 3 days to get to a commercial level, because I'm doing all this stuff that the assistant in their situation also does, which is sorting out the drum timing and making sure that they're, I don't know, the vocal tuning's right, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a different beast whenever you get professionally recorded tracks that are done in an actual studio by engineers that know what they're doing versus, hey, here's my tracks I recorded in my basement with a couple of cheap microphones that I had aimed at the wall. Totally different.
But I mean, to be fair, it's also a question of vision.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can get professionally recorded stuff that is an absolute nightmare to mix
Yeah.
because there was no one there who had a vision for what the end result was going to be. And you can also have stuff that was recorded completely on a budget that takes no mixing at all. I mean, I can give some really good examples of this one, for example, or of the kind of the good way of doing it, if you like, is that I mean, mixed rescues. I've had mixed rescues that have taken me more than a solid week of work to sort out because you know they've multi-mic'd things without thinking where they want to put the mics, and it's basically 3 versions of an unusual sound. You know, the timing's all over the place. The tunes they've done like 4 different takes of the guitar solo and not chosen between which one they're going to use, and therefore all the vocals aren't really in sync with the correct guitar solo. It's just an absolute nightmare because they haven't taken any decisions. And at the same time, I've like done sessions where I recorded an acoustic guitar duo with 2 microphones, 2 Omni microphones, as it turned out, in a little domestic basement room. And straight out of the microphones, we got the finished record pretty much. I added a little bit of reverb and that was it.
Wow.
And that's no mixing at all. The record I talked about when we recorded 2 albums in 2 albums in 4.5 days, that was another case in point because we deliberately went into it going, the band are gonna sound the way they want to sound. We're gonna make sure that we get the sound of a record coming out of the speakers while we're tracking. They can then judge whether they're playing the right things or whether they're doing the levels are right and all that kind of stuff. They can do my mixing for me basically because they can hear it in the context of something that sounds like a commercial record. And then when it comes to mix, it took me probably a half a day to track because all you're doing is you're adding a bit of extra effect. You may be just reassessing the balances and doing the automation, and it's all pretty much entirely creative work. And then you can mix like 2 or 3 songs a day.
Wow. Yeah, I've experienced some of that that you just spoke of because as a member of the Pro Mix Academy, you have access to a lot of professionally recorded tracks. And there was a song, which I won't mention who the artist was or anything like that, so as not to throw stones or anything, because I don't think it was even the artist's fault. I think it was whoever was producing it or whoever was in the room. It literally felt as if they were just like, let's throw a ton of stuff at this mix and see how all of it sticks with no vision of the arrangement, because 9 times out of 10, whenever I get a song that's so easily to mix, it's because the arrangement, the front end was done in such a way to where it pretty much mixes itself. Like when the low end cello and strings come in, the bass drops out, or, you know, you get some kind of a give and a take of instrumentation. And I think sometimes if individuals, especially working in project studios, home studios, if you get that in your mind from the offset, like if you can sort of like, I've even got a sheet that I used to use, I don't use it as much anymore, where I would actually color code, this is when things are going to come in, when they're going to drop out, and it would give me a visual representation of what the arrangement would look like. But yeah, excellent points as usual.
Well, I mean, you can often see it just in the arrangement window with arrangement within your DAW window.
Right.
I mean, the number of times a mix comes in and literally I load in the multi-track, and before I've even heard it, I can go, well, yeah, I'm gonna have to do some more work on the arrangement here, because I just look at the little blobs I can see like 3 choruses appear, and they're the same blobs on all the same tracks.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, how am I supposed to get any build up across this mix? It means I'm gonna have to, as Mixerman says, underdub something. In other words, you know, mute something out.
Right.
And yeah, it's you need to have a vision for what the thing's going to sound like on the front end, because it's the quickest way to do stuff. I mean, it's really difficult because, in a sense, some of the work I've done, it almost feels like I've done Project Studio people a disservice, because I've spent ages like going through all sorts of conniptions to turn something that was really badly produced and recorded into something that sounds like a commercial record. And the danger with that is that people go, well, I mean, I don't need to record it properly because I can just mix it. Look at Mike Senior sorting out that mixed rescue. But the thing I always try and convince people is that is the last way I would like to do it. I wouldn't wish,
Right.
3 days of sorting out 50 tracks of poorly produced backing vocals and working out the bits that don't double each other, all that, and tuning them all, and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I would far rather you just spent an extra half an hour while you're doing your tracking
Right.
thinking about, okay, I need to not like double this note or whatever it is. There's so many things that are tremendously time consuming later on. An extra 10 or 15 minutes doing tracking just heads off all that problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which that dovetails really nicely into the next question that I have, which is when it comes to different genres of music. So tell us about some of your experiences of working with different genres of music and how you adopt a different approach to fit each style.
It's interesting actually, because a lot of engineers do specialize. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, for most engineers, it makes commercial sense to specialize just because, if you do good work in a certain genre, those people are going to speak to other people in that genre. So it's an easier place to go to then find new work, because then you go, well, you heard this other record I did for these other people. They go, oh, that sounds great. That's in our genre. But I actually have to do the opposite because I do a lot of training and writing work. And so I can't
Okay.
really afford to do the same thing the whole time, because otherwise I'd be just writing about the same problems, which is not really much use to anyone. So I've had to be a bit of a gadfly in this respect. So my stylistic range has been very wide. I've done pretty much everything except death metal, which I don't quite understand, I'm afraid. So I can't really do it. So yeah, so I think because of that, I have a different approach than some engineers in that I don't really use any kind of template approach. Whereas if I worked in a given style, I would probably use templates a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
I rely a great deal on references because, again, because I don't specialize, my instincts within a given genre aren't as highly tuned and as instinctive as other people's would be if they specialized in that genre. So, I do a mix. I need to reference it more than other people because I can't rely as much on my instincts of what the style needs to sound like. So I rely a lot more on referencing because I use lots of different styles, or because I mix lots of different styles. Trying to think if there's anything else that I do that's kind of pan-stylistic, or is irrespective of style. And then nothing else that I can think of specifically.
Okay. That kind of, I actually was sort of thinking that was going to be your answer. So
No, right.
I was like, yeah, I don't, because when I pinned the question down, I was like, this is probably going to kind of come out just sort of passe, but I knew whenever I asked you though that you would still have some great insight. So if you guys are listening and you work on mainly your own stuff, what he's saying, like if that's all you ever work on, the template style is still great to use. But if you're going to be working on a wide variety of things, much like to his point, like you might not want to stick with templates because, your bluegrass template is not going to fit well with your death metal template. Okay. It's just not, when you bring a death metal band into your template, it's just not going to work. And I have to say
also, just in a general sense, just templates in general, even if you use them, you have to be quite careful with. Certainly I'm not saying, dial up a bunch of presets on your plugins, because in a lot of cases that's going to get you bad results.
Right.
Again, some of the worst mixes I've had have been ones where people have dialed up mastering presets and EQ presets and all this kind of stuff. It's like, no.
Right.
I mean, reverb presets can be quite useful, but you have to tweak from whatever preset sounds closest. Compressor presets can be useful as long as you make sure you set the threshold control to suit whatever you're processing. But yeah, I mean, the kind of templates I'm thinking of, things like, if there are certain effects that you would use a lot, or certain bits of routing or bussing that are useful. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing rock, you might have a bus group set up. You might have some kind of a parallel compression thing that you feed from your drums things, or, if you're working on a certain type of, like I was doing a kind of very middle of the road, kind of slightly, yeah, I don't know what you would say, very kind of, yeah, very middle of the road kind of pop ballad stuff for some people here in Germany. And that was a situation where I set up a set of effects for the first mix that, they were useful for that style that I wouldn't normally have as template. But I thought, well, I'm going to need these again to do other stuff that they've done. Mm-hmm. So I might transfer those effects into the other project. And that can be quite useful, like reverbs and delays and things can be that's something you can often reuse. It saves you time.
So you've done a lot of writing, prolific writing, actually, a ton of it everywhere. And
yeah, for my sins.
And creating videos and, Cambridge and all of this. So because you're constantly helping others, how do you personally stay current and continue to improve your skills as an audio engineer? Do you feel like that comes through the teaching, or?
A lot of it does, actually. In fact, there are some things that I do by the nature of having to write about it and comment on it and be conscious of everything that I think has definitely improved what I do. Certainly there's something that I do for Mixed Rescue. Mixed Rescue was a big learning experience for me too, not just for the people I was writing for, because what I had to do is I had to do the Mixed Rescue, and I often wouldn't be thinking about what I was going to be writing about or why I was doing things as such. I'd be just operating kind of on instinct, or just firefighting, just
right.
fixing things as I saw them. And then I'd have to come back after the fact and go, okay, what am I going to look at? What am I going to write about? You can't write about the whole project. There's too much going on. What am I going to pick out? What have I done? I'd go back and reassess what I'd done. And sometimes I go, well, why did I do that? It's just basically because I set something up and then forgot it was there, or something like that. You go back and you reinvestigate what you've done. And because I've written about so many of the sessions that I've done, both with recording and mixing, that has actually, I think, really improved a lot of what I've done, because I've gone back and reevaluated the decisions I made. And that's a good way of going, okay, next time I make that decision, I'm going to do something a bit different. I mean, certainly when I was still writing the session notes column for Sound on Sound, the recording one, I would make a point of every article have a box that was the things that I did wrong and why I did them wrong and how I'd go about doing it better the next time. And there's always something. You always cock up something.
That's an awesome way to look
at it. So that's one big thing. And that's one way in which I improve my mixing skills. Obviously, I do a lot of writing, but like I said, I'm like the inveterate freelancer. I'm always doing lots of different things. And so I'm always doing some mix engineering, some recording engineering, not recording engineering for a while just because of the whole COVID stuff. But hoping to get back more into that fairly soon. But yeah, I do the stuff that I write about. But it's also, I kind of sometimes write about things that I'm interested in because I want to try them or I want to do them.
Right.
So it's a bit circular. In terms of music styles and music production as a whole, one of the ways I keep myself current is actually through the Mix Review blog. I just listen to the latest commercial releases and comment about them, and listen to the Grammy Award nominations and stuff, and write about those, and that helps me, for example, identify the changing sound of records in response to the loudness detection routines that they use on the streaming platforms.
So along those same lines then, because you are working on a wide variety of projects, this one might be kind of a hard question for you, but can you discuss a project that you recently worked on that you're particularly proud of, and why?
Okay, what was I particularly proud of? I quite liked the one I did recently for this German artist. Again, just because there was a lot to do with it, but it was a classic situation where the artist, I could hear, I mean, this is a mixed rescue experience thing, really. I'm used to getting demo recordings or multi-tracks. And in the multi-track is the intention of the artist, but not the realization of that intention. And one of the things that I generally find fulfilling about particularly my mixing work, or it's kind of mixing and additional production work really, is that I have the ability to hear the potential that hasn't yet been fulfilled and plug those gaps.
Yeah.
To the point where you give the artist what they wanted, but they didn't know how to realize for themselves. And that's the bit I find most satisfying. I mean, in fact, there's just about to be another Mixed Rescue published from me in the magazine. I haven't done one for a while, but that was another classic case in point. I knew exactly the kind of sound that I thought the guy was after. And he came to it knowing the kind of stuff that I do in Mixed Rescue, which is a bit more kind of hammer and tongs than you might normally expect a mix engineer to do. And he was like, okay, I've got as far as I can, and I can't get it to where I feel happy with it. Just go with it. Do whatever you like. Try whatever creative things you do. Just basically thrill me. And so I just went at it and thought, well, this is how I kind of instinctively feel based on what he's put in there of how he wants it to sound. I'm just going to go that way. And in fact, I did something I don't think I've ever done in a mixed rescue before, which is I added some backing vocals. And he was absolutely over the moon about it. He loved it. And I mean, and the thing is, that gives me tremendous satisfaction. I just love the fact, I mean, the reason I got into this is just to help people be able to make their music and to be able to get the kind of vision that they wanted out into the world. It's the same reason I kind of teach people to record and mix and produce and whatever else, is that it just helps music get out there. I mean, I love it when I get emails from people who go, oh yeah, I spoke to you 5 years ago and you answered some question or other. I bought your book and then here's the album that I've just done. And I go, blimey, that's good. You know, and that's, yes. I mean, that's tremendously satisfying. And that's where I get a lot of satisfaction from doing this.
I definitely resonate with that. That's the entire intention of starting the channel and the podcast and the website and all of that. And what started as just me helping some friends out that wanted to record better demos in their basement has now transformed into this awesome community of individuals where now I can have awesome people like you on to share your wealth of knowledge. And
but I mean, how do you balance those? That kind of having to, you've got all this kind of tuition stuff and, you know, doing podcasts, doing videos, and at the same time, you know, actually engaging in the activity.
It's, you know, it's one of those things where it has to be a labor of love. It really does. Like at the end of the day, you have to, I mean, there's like the last couple of weeks of last year, I literally said, guys, I've got to take a break. And I'm done for the rest of the year. And I'm feeling bad. And here I am on Christmas Eve rather, was recording a video for them going, hey guys, hope you have a Merry Christmas, have a Happy New Year's. I'll see you guys in a little bit. And I'm like, I'm still recording the video when I said I wasn't going to be doing this. But it's one of those things where, you know, when you start to develop a community and you start to see some familiar names, which unfortunately I haven't got to see everyone's faces that are here in the chat today, but I've got to see a lot of you. And you really become like a family. And then instead of it just becoming like a chore or a job or I'm just creating content, it becomes more of a, hey, I'm going to go hang out with my buds and we're going to geek out about music today. And hopefully I'll say something that'll help them. And what I've noticed is, and this is the awesome part about it is, and I'm sure you've seen this in your own work, like for everything that I put out there that I'm like, I hope this helps you guys, I get 3 things back that I'm like, ooh, that really helped me. I'm going to have to try that. I'm going to have to use that, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's very reciprocal. It's one of those things where the more you give, I feel like the more you receive as well. And so we could talk a little bit about the balancing of that, which really it's like blocking out time, never sleeping, you know, lots of coffee.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's really just realizing why you started it in the first place. And that's why I love your attitude and your approach to things of, I just did this just to help people. And thank you. Thank you so much because you've helped me a ton as well. So I got 3 more questions and then we will go ahead and conclude today. The first is, where can people find out more about your work? I need you to plug everywhere where they can find you.
Well, pretty much the hub of everything Mike Senior is the Cambridge MT website. So that's cambridge-mt.com.
Okay, cool.
And that's the place to go. Dead easy. And that's got the multi-track library, that's got all the resources for the books that are all those resources are free, hundreds of audio examples and links and videos and all sorts of stuff. There's the library of mic positions, which is about 20 different instruments that I multi-mic'd, all with the same model of mic, so that you can hear differences in mic position on different instruments. That's lots of fun. I've got huge, great like mix competitions that I did where I've got all the mixes and all my commentary and critique about them all, and then the winners roster. There's also, of course, the mix review site that is kind of linked to Cambridge MT. That's got, I mean, now 600. I astonished myself the other day when I looked at the number. 600 critiques of commercial productions. I've been doing that for more than a decade now.
Wow.
And there's links to all my sound on sound writing from the Cambridge MT site. Also through that site, you can link through to my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/CambridgeMT. That's all one word. And there I've got like a monthly mixing podcast that I do where I take one of the multi-tracks from the library, I mix it, I explain what I'm doing and all the kind of recommendations I make for mixing it. I critique someone's mix on it. And I have like regular weekly like tutorial videos. All my stuff's pretty kind of fully scripted stuff. Regular weekly blog posts as well about, I mean, I was just talking about whether I worry about oversampling and aliasing when I'm using my plugins. It was my latest Q&A, but I'm writing like recording shortcuts for things, my go-to recording techniques if I have to basically record something blind or So I've got lots of stuff going on, but basically most of it centers, it all kind of fans out from the Cambridge MT website.
That's awesome. And I have frequented that website quite a bit. So thank you so much for that. And about those multi-tracks, just to sort of clear the air about this, because I've heard a lot of questioning, as long as they are crediting the artist, as long as they're crediting people, they can still use it in a portfolio. They just can't say, hey, I mixed, produced, and mastered this.
Now this is a tricky one because the actual rubric, and I deliberately didn't make the rubric too kind of legalistic. The rubric is basically that it is for non-commercial educational purposes. Is the idea of using the multi-track. The multi-track libraries. So portfolios are a little bit of a gray area, and normally I recommend that if someone's going to use something on a portfolio, if they're using it as basically touting for mix work, it becomes marketing basically for their mix work. If they're going to use it in that perspective, then I would recommend contacting the artists themselves and asking for permission to do that. The fact is that all the people who contribute stuff to the multi-track library, they all did it at their own free will. A lot of them approached me of their own bat. They're all lovely people. So if you just go up and say, look, I'm starting this mix service, I'd really like to showcase your music and a mix of your music on my site. Can I use it here and just give a link to your website? They're all independent musicians who want web traffic. So if you publicize their stuff for them, then they're usually happy to do so. But that's one of the situations where I would try and get the artist's permission. If you're just wanting to practice mixing and post it on a forum or something, get some feedback, share mixes between people, all of that is, for me, it's just entirely educational. You can do that kind of stuff. That's absolutely what the library was intended for, was for people to have stuff so that they could learn about mixing before they had to learn about recording. Because I think it's better to learn how to mix first and then learn how to record.
Good point.
Because once you know how to mix and how far you can mix something and what you can do, what you fix and what you can't, then you know what you have to do when you're recording. That teaches you how to record. In fact, it was mixing that taught me how to record. Was mixing so many rubbishy recordings and going, well, I'm not doing that. I'm going to do it differently because I don't want to spend ages fixing it.
This has been a moment of clarity with Mike Sr. again. I love that. Yes, learn mixing before recording. That's awesome. That's same way for me, man. I was recording my stuff and it sounded horrible. And then I started getting into mixing and I'm like, well, no wonder it sounds horrible. There's like 180 hertz all over the place here. I need to figure out how to take care of that on the front end. And then, our good friend Joe Gilder in the audio community, he's always get it right at the source. He's been preaching that forever. Of course, not just him. The very first proponent of that was
also,
Al Schmidt.
I mean, who isn't a bit? Yeah, absolutely, Al Schmidt. I mean, the guy who uses no EQ at mixdown. I mean, that blew my mind when I first heard of that. In fact, the first time I heard about that was actually at the AS show, at a panel of Grammy-winning engineers. I think it was, I know there was Frank Filippetti, Ed Cherney, and Al Schmidt, and Elliot Shiner, and one other person. And Frank Filippetti was like moderating, and they took questions, and someone came up to the mic and said, I just wanted to ask each of you what your favorite EQ is. And Frank Filippetti goes, okay, well, I mean, obviously we the elder statesman on the panel. Well, we'll go to you, Al, first. And Al was unfortunately, he's such a nice guy. He said, well, I feel a loss for words. I'm really sorry, I can't help, but I'm afraid I don't use EQ. You can hear like 1,000 jaws hit the floor, and you see the other guys on the panel like doing a double take. And then Frank Filippetti said something like, what you mean when you record? He goes, no. I don't use EQ when I record or when I mix.
Right.
You get the gasps around the audience with, and I mean, ever since hearing that, I made it my duty to basically stalk Al Schmidt until I worked out how he could do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was actually one of the big reasons why I ended up writing that, was to explain what I'd discovered about the way Al Schmidt records. But yeah, I don't know quite how I got completely off tangent there, but
oh, that was my fault. I said Al Schmidt, and then it just went whoop.
Yeah, you know, at the moment you talk to me about Al Schmidt, I'm an Al Schmidt groupie.
Same here. Yeah, Which, by the way, the Cambridge link, I've actually got it pinned in the chat right now. Thank you, DJ Big Red 81, for posting that earlier. I've got it pinned there, so if you guys want to go and find that. So I got two more questions. This is actually it's one more, but it's a two-part question.
Did I answer the previous one? I can't remember.
Absolutely.
I just went off on one about Al Schmidt.
No, absolutely. So, Mike, this is a curveball question.
Okay.
First part of the question is, what's your favorite color?
Favorite color? Ooh, probably red.
Ooh, okay. What does the color red taste like?
Cinnamon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an answer within like 2 seconds. Awesome.
But the thing is, it's difficult with something like that, because there are actually people who have much stronger connections between their senses than others.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, some very famous engineers, they're called the synesthesia, if that's not too simple.
There it is.
Bruce Swedien was synesthetic, so was Quincy Jones. There are a few others as well. But yeah, and there's different types of synesthesia. The one we always think about is usually between sound and vision, you know, color and sound. And some people say, oh yeah, you know, that's a kind of a purple sound. But actually, synesthesia can work with all the senses. So you could experience taste with color.
That's awesome. I've done this
question. But I'm not synesthetic.
I've done this question on every single guest, and people who are, this is what I've noticed though, like people that are creative, they come up with an answer very quickly. People who are more like, people who are more technical, like for instance, I won't mention any names yet again, but I had a mastering engineer on who's more technically minded. Mastering engineers are. And when I asked him, he said, my favorite color is black. And I was like, okay, well, what does the color black? I think I said taste like or smell like, one of the two. And he was like, what kind of a question is it? It doesn't have a taste. I was like, oh crap, that fell flat on its face. But then after he thought about it for a minute, he was like, well, you know, actually it does kind of, it's got a charcoal taste or smell to it. And I was like, okay, all right, now we're getting somewhere. And then he started kind of like, and then he expanded on this whole thing about how black is not actually a color. It's actually the absence of white. And I was like, what just happened? The guy went from being like overly technical and analytical to like went super creative, like all of a sudden. I was like, okay, cool. But great.
I mean, I don't know. I'd have difficulty. I mean, maybe I'd just have difficulty not judging someone if their answer was beige. You know.
Oh, well, what do we do there? It smells like khakis.
Gray.
That's awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing your wealth of knowledge. And I trust, hopefully, that it will not be the last time seeing you here. We do also have a VIP membership section that I would like to invite you to become a free member of. You can either choose to do so or not. But within there, if you guys want to take your Cambridge library multi-tracks, as he's already stated, mix those and place them inside of there. I'm lurking in there all the time, obviously. Other individuals, there's a ton of people who are there to help sort of see you through those mixes and tell you, maybe give you some pointers on what you could do. I'm not saying that Mike's going to be in there all the time. He's got his own irons in the fire. But I would like to invite him in there nonetheless so that he can see kind of what we're doing with the tracks that he's provided. And likewise, if you guys have not checked out any of his Sound on Sound stuff, you got to check that out as well. Not just the prolific writings, but the podcast is amazing. I have listened to several of those podcasts at work and got an epiphany. And then I was like, I cannot wait to clock out. I got to try this. So thank you guys so much for showing up too, because if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't have had some of the really cool questions. Thank you to the first timers that have popped in the chat as well. Greatly appreciate you guys. Barry Anderson was one of them. Looks like we had another one. If I miss you, Paul Morgan. I think that was another first timer. If I call you a first timer and you're not, it's because you don't comment enough. So make sure that you're commenting on here. And but thank you all for
Well, I mean,
showing
if you
up.
like the SOS podcast, you should check the Cambridge FT Patrons podcast. When there are I think there are 80 episodes of that now. They're each like an hour long. So
Nice.
there's loads and loads of stuff in there.
Nice.
In fact, some of those, if you go to the multi-track library, kind of to the right-hand side of the latest editions list, there's some of the podcasts listed there, and there are a few that are free to listen to. So you can actually have a listen to them there too, without signing up to the
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you so much yet again for coming on. And I am going to be posting this as a video and as a podcast. So as soon as those two are ready, I'll be sending you the links to those so that you can share those on your socials or just keep them in your archives. But yeah, I definitely got a lot out of this conversation today, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Great. It's a pleasure as always.
All right. Well, until next time, Mike, we will see you later. And thank you for all of the moments of clarity. We'll see you, buddy.
Recording stopped.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for showing up yet again. I am going to go ahead and hop off here because I am starving to death. Literally, like my stomach's eating itself from within. Part of that's the diet that I'm on, and the other part of it is the fact that I haven't ate all morning yet. So, but thank you guys so much for hopping on, and thank you all for being a part of this ever-growing community. And if you haven't checked out the VIP membership, if you send me an email and you let me know, you can do that at robert@homestudiosimplified.com, or you can do it at homestudiosimplified@gmail.com. If you send me an email, or you can even leave a comment underneath this video after it's been posted, and you say, not here in the live chat, but on the actual video itself, leave a comment and say, loved the interview, loved whatever it was. I will give you a free month of the VIP membership just for you to check it out. So either send me an email or comment below and let me know how to follow up with you so that I can send you that link. But either way, I greatly appreciate you guys for showing up today. And thank you so much, Mike. Man, was that not just awesome? And if you ever checked out any of his work, you know the guy he knows what he's talking about. And I love the fact of bringing him on because he's not just another individual that's like, if you want a great sound, do this. And he's working in a multi-million-dollar studio. He's actually in the trenches doing what we do every single day to bring you some awesome tips and tricks. So until next time, guys, love each and every one of you. You know what time it is. We can dream alone. We can even create alone, but together we can achieve so much more. God bless you guys.